By 1300 BC, a people speaking an early form of the Greek language had inhabited large portions of mainland Greece. Their capital city of Mycenae was surrounded by a massive citadel, built over the course of 150 years.
This is what is left of Mycenae. These ruins show us that not only were these early Greeks master builders, but they were capable of some amazing engineering feats.
First thing, of course, that you will see is the fortification walls, which are very impressive. And immediately you have this feeling of awesome.
Stone blocks which weigh up to 10 tons apiece. They were engineered with such precision that each stone fit perfectly in place to its adjacent block. Like the Egyptians, the Mycenaeans built incredible structures to house their leaders in the afterlife.
The Mycenaeans work with straight lines and right angles, so the circle is just for this kind of structure.
Around 1100 BC, this early Greek civilization suddenly and mysteriously disintegrated and disappeared.
New barbarian tribes came from the steppes and they attacked the civilizations of Egypt, they attacked the civilization of Mesopotamia, causing disruption in the trade routes.
With the fall of Mycenae, Greece entered a dark age. Over 4 centuries, its culture fell into a deep slumber. Then, in the 8th century BC, individual city-states began to develop and flourish, each one forging its own identity, competing for economic, military, and engineering prominence.
Each of these city-states was sort of a self-contained, self-reliant mini-country within Greece. Inasmuch as each of these city-states sort of spoke the same lingo, worshiped the same gods, there was really no sense of a national unity, and their only priority was their own particular regional and cultural agenda. At best, they didn't get along. At worst, they were violently at each other's throats.
Sparta, Athens, Corinth, Thebes. These are just a few of the more than 100 city-states that emerged all around Greece.
Taxos. What a pleasant surprise.
This morning's full of surprises, Leonidas.
We've been tricked. There'll be more than a few hundred. This is a surprise.
Silence!
This isn't an army.
We heard Sparta was on the warpath. And we were eager to join forces.
If it is blood you seek, you're welcome to join us.
But you bring only this handful of soldiers against Xerxes? I see I was wrong to expect Sparta's commitment to at least match our own.
Doesn't it? You, there. What is your profession?
I'm a potter, sir.
And you, Arcadian. What is your profession?
Sculptor, sir.
Sculptor. And you?
Blacksmith.
Spartans! What is your profession? See, old friend, I brought more soldiers than you did.
In the Greek city-state of Sparta, boys began their military training at age 7.
Only the hard and strong may call themselves Spartans. Only the hard. Only the strong. We Spartans are descended from Hercules himself, taught never to retreat, never to surrender, taught that death in the battlefield is the greatest glory he could achieve in his life. Spartans, the finest soldiers the world has ever known.
Before the advent of democracy in Greece, many of these city-states were led by a single ruler, called a tyrant. The rule of the few over the many was the only form of government humans had ever known, but that was about to change. The city-state of Athens was going to change the course of world history.
Unlike the representative democracies common today, where voters elect leaders to make laws and decisions on their behalf. 5th century BC Athens was a direct democracy that encouraged wide participation through the principle of ha boulamenos, or anyone who wishes. This meant that any of its approximately 30,000 eligible citizens could attend the ecclesia, a general assembly meeting several times a month. In principle, any of the 6,000 or so who showed up at each session had the right to address their fellow citizens, propose a law, or bring a public lawsuit. Of course, a crowd of 6,000 people trying to speak at the same time would not have made for effective government. So the Athenian system also relied on a 500-member governing council called the boule to set the agenda and evaluate proposals, in addition to hundreds of jurors and magistrates to handle legal matters. Rather than being elected or appointed, the people in these positions were chosen by lot. This process of randomized selection is known as sortition. The only positions filled by elections were those recognized as requiring expertise, such as generals. But these were considered aristocratic, meaning rule by the best, as opposed to democracies, rule by the many.
Persia was the world superpower of its day. Enormously wealthy, enormously self-confident. The greatest multi-ethnic, multicultural empire the world had seen.
A Persian invasion force of epic proportions is on the horizon.
Be afraid! Sparta will burn to the ground! 1,000 nations of the Persian Empire descend upon you!
What must a king do to save his world?
Instead, ask yourself, what should a free man do?
Threaten my people with slavery and death! This is madness!
Madness.
This is Sparta! We will stand and fight!
A new age has begun.
An age of freedom! And all who know that 300 Spartans give their last breath to defend it! Spartans! Tonight we dine in hell!
As many as 700 ships carrying 150,000 warriors determined to add Greece to their empire. But one Greek is poised and ready for battle. His name is Themistocles, an Athenian admiral and statesman who has been preparing for this moment for years. A man who didn't come from the aristocratic ranks and wasn't ashamed to let his fellow Athenians know it.
And he prided himself on his lack of polish. He said that he might not know how to sing well, but he knew all you needed to know to make a city great and free.
Themistocles was no stranger to facing the Persians in battle. 10 years earlier, a smaller Persian force had invaded Greece for the first time and fought the Athenians and her allies at Marathon. He detected in the Persian war machine, their navy.
He understood that the water was not the Persians' natural element. Persia was a land power. In fact, Persian religion considered salt water to be demonic.
Themistocles wanted the Greeks to build a navy unlike any the world had ever seen. Immediately, work began at breakneck speed to build a fleet of 200 triremes, the deadliest ship in the ancient world.
It's about 130 feet long. It's light and sleek, and it's tipped with a wooden ram covered in bronze at the water level, and that is the offensive weapon of the trireme. Think of the trireme actually as a guided missile.
170 rowers on 3 separate levels, 62 on the top level, 54 in the middle, and 54 on the bottom.
And the rowers, of course, have to learn how to work as a team. They have to learn to row together in unison, which is an easy thing to begin to do, but a very difficult thing to master.
Themistocles' fleet of triremes was finished in just a few years and in the nick of time. In the spring of 480 BC, Persia launched a massive invasion of Greece.
But going up against Persia, the world's greatest superpower of the time, would be no day at the beach for Themistocles. First of all, the Greek naval fleet was outnumbered 2-1. Second of all, Themistocles faced the almost insurmountable problem of trying to unite a completely disparate and contentious group of warriors into one command.
That the Persian fleet outnumbered the combined Greek fleet by almost 2-1, so he devised a simple yet cunning plan to level the odds.
He had to turn a disadvantage into an advantage, the fact that he had fewer ships. So the best place that he could do that was at the Straits of Salamis.
Themistocles would devise a ruse to lure the Persian fleet into the narrow straits of Salamis.
Themistocles was a very cunning man, a great trickster.
On the eve of the battle, Themistocles sent a trusted servant across the straits to the Persian camp. The servant played the role of a traitor, telling the Persian king the Greeks were in disarray, and if the Persians sent their ships in the night, they could surprise the Greek navy in the morning. The Persians took the bait.
So at dawn, the Persians discovered to their shock that the Greek fleet, instead of being about to flee, was getting into battle formation.
Now 200 triremes, powered by 34,000 Greek rowers, formed into a line. There was no room for the Persians to maneuver in the narrow straits. The perfect trap, as the Greek triremes encircled the Persian ships, then pounded them with their forward rams.
And the Persian officers died in unusually high proportions.
Some historical sources claim the Persians lost as many as 200 ships to the Greeks' 40. Any Persians that didn't drown were slaughtered by Greek soldiers waiting on shore. When Themistocles defeated the Persians at the Battle of Salamis, he saved not only Athens, but also its young democracy, which had been born about 25 years earlier. After the stunning victory at Salamis, Themistocles was hailed as a hero, but his personal ambitions and greed began to add to his many political enemies. It was only a matter of time before the rage of the assembly boiled over.
Athens at this time had a practice called ostracism, an annual unpopularity contest, in which the people would vote for the politician who they felt was most disruptive, most dangerous to the political process, and they would exile him for 10 years.
He would never see Athens again.
Pericles came from one of the old aristocratic families of Athens, so he came from the kind of family background in which a career of political and military leadership was expected.
His rise to power began when he was elected as a young man to the position of strategos, one of 10 such men who commanded the army and set foreign policy.
He was able to speak and convince. He was completely dedicated to what he did.
But despite the defeat of the Persian Empire at Salamis, the threat of another invasion was always looming. In 478 BC, Athens, together with the city-states of the Aegean, formed a mutual defense alliance called the Delian League.
By 450 BC, Athens has become the undisputed leader of the Delian League, which is nothing more than a money faucet for the city-state. But Pericles, as undisputed leader of Athens, finds ways to put this money to the best possible use by building massive public structures that best reflect the grandeur and magnificence of Athens. The world, the most remarkable piece of architecture in all of Greek antiquity, the Parthenon.
It would take thousands of laborers and skilled craftsmen to create this magnificent temple. And it would cost more than any building the Greeks had ever engineered. All about 30,000 tons of the fine white stone would be needed. Each column consisted of 11 separate drums, stacked one on top of the other like checkers. They were carved so that they would perfectly fit when laid together in a column. To do this, the top of each drum was divided into 4 concentric circles, with each ring either smoothed or roughed out, depending on the amount of grip needed to interlock with the next drum. In the center of each drum, masons cut a rectangular notch measuring about 4 to 6 inches square and 3 to 4 inches deep. Carpenters then inserted wooden plugs into the notches, which served to align and center each drum with the one above it. The single column of the Parthenon could weigh between 63 and 119 tons.
This is that the architects incorporated a series of sort of optical illusions when they built it. So let's take a look at the stairs. They seem to be straight, but no, closer look, they bow in the center and they go back down at the end. Now this conceit, if you will, continues right up to the columns. This column is of the Doric order. There's no base. It seems to grow right up out of the stone. Each column has 20 flutes, which makes the column sort of undulate as you look around it. And then the column bows out in the center and bows back up at the top. This is a process called entasis.
Parthenon's main function was to provide shelter for the monumental statue of Athena.
Parthenon was an extremely expensive building, but the statue inside of it was almost equal in cost to the building itself, if not even more expensive.
Materials, gold and ivory.
Hundreds of sculptors created lifelike figures that proved the craftsmanship wasn't simply in the engineering. The most famous carving in the decoration of the temple is the frieze running on the interior walls of the Parthenon.
In antiquity, not only the sculptures, but also many other parts of the building were richly decorated with paint.
It advertised the power of Athens to the world. Ironically, the supremacy the Parthenon symbolized was already waning, and Athens' longtime enemy Sparta was on the rise.
Once Athens had established this great alliance system, or as some people put it, this Athenian empire, and arguably that's what it became, the Spartans began more and more to look askance, as it were, at the Athenians, and eventually, by the 430s, to feel threatened by the Athenians.
In 431 BC, Sparta moved on Athens. For 2 long years, Athens held out against the Spartan siege. But Pericles' shining city was about to come under attack by an invisible enemy.
After a couple of years, because of the overcrowding in the city of Athens, disease that seems to have come originally from the Near East attacked the Athenian people. It's known as the Great Athenian Plague. Large numbers of Athenians died in this plague.
The bloody and brutal conflict between Athens and Sparta, known as the Peloponnesian War, continued for another 25 years, until finally in 404 BC, Athens fell. No medals were awarded in the ancient Olympics. A winner received an olive wreath on his head.
Recently we talked about the Peloponnesian War, and leading up to that, Sparta and Athens had been fighting with the Persians immediately to their east for quite a long time. Athens using its powerful navy and Sparta using its great army. In order to help protect against the Persians, Athens had a great idea. They were going to create an alliance, a group of city-states for mutual defense, and they called it the Delian League since it was founded on the island of Delos. And smaller city-states would pay some money to Athens, who would supposedly use that money to pay for the defense and expand its navy and make sure they're strong. The Athenians, however, used the money to pay for buildings in their city-state and did things that weren't necessarily for the best of the Delian League, even though it was good for themselves. And so other city-states resented this, and Sparta in particular decided to march and lay siege to the city-state of Athens. That means they surrounded them and said, you can't come out and grow crops and get all the stuff you need. And this time they defeat Athens. Sparta takes control, therefore, of Greece for roughly 30 years, and the other city-states are resentful of Sparta's rough handling of the issue, and so there's even more fighting. So city-states, some gain power for a while, and other gain power for a while, and they continue to fight. This is known as the Peloponnesian War. These series of wars on the Peloponnesian islands, or the peninsula there, all throughout Greece. And with all this fighting, young men are dying, and food is going out, and food is going to the soldiers, there's less farmers, there's less artisans. All these people are having a hard time, and sure enough, this weakens Greece. To the north is a place called Macedonia, who noticed these events, and eventually King Philip II notices the weakened Greece and decides time to take some action. And sure enough, Philip II of Macedonia comes down and mounts an attack against Athens and Thebes. Athens says, please come help us, we need your help, and everyone's like, forget you. And Thebes in Athens are crushed by Philip. The other city-states see how badly Athens and Thebes are defeated and decide, you know what, it's probably better if we just become part of Macedonia, and that's what happens. Philip is a really great military leader because he takes good ideas and he makes them even better. So the Greeks had something what was known as the phalanx, and the Macedonians take the phalanx, and you can see the pictures here. They make it even better by backing it up with cavalry, that's guys on horses, and of course archers from behind. So even though with the phalanx, you can't get close as it is with all them pointy spears, now you have even more arrows shot out past it and landing on top of you even before you reach the phalanx to attack it. So it's really impressive. And Philip decides he's going to go ahead and take care of the Persians, but he never makes it. At his daughter's wedding, he's murdered. And so control goes to his son Alexander, who's just 20 years old. The people of Thebes says, we're not taking orders from this 20-year-old, and they revolt. And so Alexander moves down to Thebes and crushes Thebes and enslaves the whole city-state within a year. And this freaks everyone out in Greece, and they decide, we're really going to listen to this Alexander guy. He means business. Alexander, now having taken care of the Greeks, decides he's going to go into Persia and crushes them. And again, all along the way, he's improving these ideas. And he starts taking with him Greek culture. Even though he's from Macedonia, he likes Greek culture. Through Persia, he starts laying out Greek ideas. He continues on. And Alexander eventually goes to Asia Minor, Central Asia, and all the way to the Indus River. That's the edge of India there. Incredible. All along the way, he's spreading these Greek ideas, Greek ideals. He's founding cities known as Alexandria, named after himself. And these became great centers of learning and all this. And he encourages Greek settlers to come who speak Greek. And he encourages Greek temples and Greek-style architecture to be built. And these Egyptian and Syrian and Macedonia cultures are blended with Greek culture. And this is known as Hellenistic. So an Egyptian, Assyrian, or Macedonian culture blended with Greek. So it's not truly Greek, and it's not truly Egyptian, it's not truly Syrian, it's this mix, and that's known as Hellenistic culture. It spreads Greek ideas, which were good ideas, and they went around vast parts of the world. Alexander, over his conquest, creates the world's biggest empire up to that point. It was massive. And he would have kept going, but his soldiers decided to stop fighting at the Indus River. We want to go home, Alexander. He now is known as Alexander the Great because of his conquest, and he agrees. But Alexander never makes it back to Macedonia. He gets to Babylon, gets a fever, and dies at the age of 33. And he's buried in his most famous founded city, Alexandria, Egypt, in a golden coffin. Alexandria, Egypt was a fabulous city, and it was considered one of the world's greatest cities all the way until the Arabians conquered it in the 600 ADs. All these Hellenistic kingdoms of Hellenistic Syria, Hellenistic Macedonia, and Hellenistic Egypt are eventually all conquered by Rome. These three kingdoms come about following Alexander's death. When he died, there was no apparent heir. There was no clear successor to Alexander, and so there was some infighting, but his three most powerful generals decided to divide it up and rule it separately, and they were happy with that, and it was a good system until the Romans eventually conquered all three of those Hellenistic kingdoms.